Hello again, everyone. It's your favorite scruffy-looking scoundrel, the Crazy Carillion Solo Straight, and I'm back again today with another episode of Never Tell Me the Odds. So if you saw my last video, there was a little debate that had come up about proper gearing of teams. So I wanted to cover that today. But before we get into that, I will ask at this time that you please pause and make sure to like and or subscribe, all right, for future content moving forward. Now, to that point, the number one mistake free-to-play players could be making is thinking this game is still skill-based. Now, I know that's going to be kind of a hard pill to swallow, so let me talk about what I mean by that. As a player who's been playing this game since pretty much right at day one launch, 6 years in now, used to anyone before maybe I'd say 2-3 years ago, most people before the big announcements of project pieces like GLs and things like that, most people would tell you that this game used to have a certain level of skill. Now, what do I mean by skill? I mean you could take a low geared team and still complete certain events. And what we're focusing on with that is the journey guide events, okay? Journey guide specific characters. So I remember you could take a low geared faction of bounty hunters and with some RNG go in and get your Chewbacca unlocked. So it was kind of like a talking point, a bragging right, if you will, to say, hey, that is some skill, man. I took some Gear 7 bounty hunters in and was able to complete that event. And I wanted to try and make a video as like a cautionary tale to free-to-play players. This is not to discourage you in any way, but it's to understand where the game is going and try and change some mindsets, so to say, as you're going to get there, as you're going on your journey. So there are 4 main reasons that this game is no longer skill-based. Being number 1, the C-Pit Challenge Pit Rancor Raid. Now, with the application of the Challenge Pit Rancor Raid, they have gated you at having Relic 5 only characters. So that was one of the first signs we saw, these shifting in power and these shifting in mindsets, that they want you to be gated. In addition to that, your legendary unlocks, okay? So if you look at characters since the Jedi Knight Luke application into the game, pretty much every legendary or required project after that, what they call legendaries now, requires a relic gate. Specifically, CG's way of focusing on how do we take the skill aspect out of these lower free-to-play players. In addition to that, we also see them now gating the hard conquest mode with a 4 million total GP, and then in addition Proving Grounds, which is like a subsidiary version or subsidiary mode of Conquest now. So the ultimate goal for CG is beginning to be less of that skill-based and more of that we're just going to say this is the requirement. Lastly, of course, with the new application of the Datacrons. The Emperor Palpatine team with a 3-star Mara Jade. She's very viable at 3 stars. However, now with the Datacron application, if you happen to have an Imperial Datacron, you can't use Mara Jade because she will debunk the entire thing because she doesn't meet the minimum level requirements for the team to gain the boost and bonuses. So let's dive in more specifically about some journey guide characters. Namely, as a free-to-play, newer play, lower tier account player, the ones you can still get by with doing with some skill metrics, which is to say you don't have to go crazy over gearing these things, and some that you want to be focusing on bigger long-term projects, because that's obviously where CG's been focused and going. Who is worth to put gear on early in game, okay? So the first one we're going to talk about is Thrawn Palpatine. I'm going to put them together and link them together. Palpatine, of course, requires any rebels, but Thrawn specifically requires the Phoenix. So your Phoenix squad, as we talked about in other videos, should be your primary starting squad. So when you look at the Phoenix squad themselves, they don't really have any current in-game project or viability unless you're working on fleets, okay? So if you're at a point where you want to talk about working on fleets for in-game, They could be usable because they're crew members. You get them up to gear 12, maybe gear 13 to apply relics, 6-dot mods for their ship purposes. Other than that, they have no end game. So you can still consider the Phoenix to be a team that you want to get around gear 8, gear 10, something like that. You don't need Zetas on them, okay, to unlock Thrawn. So that is still a skill-based metric, as with Palpatine, because, of course, Phoenix can unlock Palpatine, same team. Moving on, the next one we're going to talk about is the Grandmaster Yoda event. Grandmaster Yoda requires any 7-star Jedi. So, I'm going to go ahead and call this out. It's still very much one of those skill-based, and that means any Jedi you take in there, gear 7, gear 8, up to gear 10, you'll be able to complete the event and unlock Grandmaster Yoda, okay? So, what I do want to call out, though, is think about where you're going. What projects are you going to eventually be working on? So, if you're going for Jedi Master Kenobi, Jedi Master Luke, Jedi Knight Luke maybe even, or Gas, you might want to actually put some gear on some of these specific Jedis you're unlocking early, if they double up. So if you're going to be going for those projects directly, maybe go ahead and throw a little bit higher gear. Now, I'm not saying go crazy and in order to unlock Grandmaster Yoda, take everyone to gear 13. I'm not saying that. But instead of stopping at gear 8 or gear 10, for instance, if you're going to be using your Jedi Knight Anakin to do that, you might want to go ahead and get him up to gear 11, gear 12 to go ahead and carry you through that event, unlock Grandmaster Yoda early, and then you have him ready to progress to your next project if you're trying to rush a C. So, what we're saying with that is be cognizant of where you're going, okay? Then we got R2. R2 requires Empire characters. Now, if you rush C and seen my video on that, not an issue. You got plenty of Empire characters early on, high relics. They will carry you through. You just got to have them unlock R2. However, with gearing, again, if you're rushing C, you want to put a little bit higher gear on some of those specific Empire characters. If you're not rushing C, think about what you're doing with R2. Are you unlocking them so that you eventually will be progressing? If so, then maybe R2 himself you want to put some higher gear on. For BB-8, you need First Order, okay? So we're going to talk about that. BB-8 is one of those that the First Order, if you're rushing Kylo, a lot of people like Kylo to be their first GL, you could totally, again, skill-based, unlock him gear 8 to gear 10. But if you're rushing Kylo or working on your Kylo Ren, you might want to go ahead and take a few of those staples a little bit higher just so you're prepared for that project later on. As for BB-8 himself, he is a requirement to unlock Galactic Legend Rey. Like, overall, if you look at any character in this journey guide, they're all needed for a bigger project, okay? There's only 1 or 2 exceptions in the journey guide. So anybody in the journey guide, as you're unlocking them, you probably want to go ahead and take that character up because they're going to be needed for something specific later on anyway. So, brings me back to Padme. If you saw my latest video, you saw with Padme, got a little bit of hate on this, okay, for whether or not you gear your bugs. I still say, don't gear the bugs, but that's just personal if you have rushed a GL. Now, if you're doing the natural progression of the game and you're like, I am nowhere near ready to go for a GL out the gate, I'm a newer player, I'm trying to just play and have fun, then obviously, yes, the GOs do have viability. They do have a use. They will help you eventually unlock WAT, help your guilds, things like that. So I'm not debunking that. I got a lot of heat for that, so I wanted to kind of talk about it. That was a specific niche when we said don't farm the GOs. And it wasn't so much about farming as it was gearing them. So a little clarity there. But as we showed in that video, Padme, Dooku, Jango, and any 7-star Separatist, you can still unlock Padme. What you want to be focusing on as you're going for Padme is thinking, why am I unlocking Padme? Because if you're working for Gas, Padme herself, you might want to go ahead and gear up a little bit. Or eventually Lord Vader, right? So, with all of these things, again, as a newer free-to-play player, be thinking as you're working on these metrics, what are skill farms and what are long-term projects that I want to go ahead and throw some gear on. Okay, so then CLS. CLS just takes specific rebels. All of those rebels, you can, again, gear 8, gear 10. All of these things we're talking about is pretty much the gear 8, gear 10, no Zetas range, right? So they're skilled. in terms of the terminology, what we're talking about. But I will call this out. If you are unlocking CLS and your next big project goal is for Jedi Master Luke, you might want to go ahead and take your old Ben up a little bit higher in terms of gear, or your Princess Leia or R2, things like that. So it's always a constant, what am I working on, but where am I going whenever you play this game, okay? Take the skill away. There's no more skill, guys. It's not. If you're going to play this game for any longevity period of time, you're going to want to be doing this stuff over in progression anyway. Nobody wants to say, hey, I unlocked Chewbacca at 7 gear with my bounty hunters, and then say, hey, now I'm doing executor. I got to go back and re-gear all those bounty hunters anyway, okay, to Relic 5 to meet that requirement. So go ahead and be thinking about that. It's not so much what you can do early because you're a skillful player. I'm not trying to take that away from anyone, okay? There is some skill, but at the same time, the metrics for CG is don't make it a skill game anymore, okay? Training Rey, okay? And she takes resistance characters, okay? So if you're going to be unlocking her and you have no future plans for Jedi Master Luke, for her herself, and all you want to do is just have a resistance team early on, no problem, gear 8 to 10. However, if you're going to be working on Galactic Legend Rey or Jedi Master Luke, for Rey herself, you want to take her on up, of course. But for the entire team, maybe throw a little bit more relics on them. Beskar Armor Mando. Currently, he's legendary, and he himself only has one main use as a end game project, and that's going to be the Executor, okay, which is more tied to his ship than anything else. So that's one of those, that's at your discretion, okay? That is a skill event, and what I mean by that is you go in there, no Zeta on those scoundrel requirements, right? No higher gear than 8 to 10, and you can unlock Beskar Armor Mando with no problems. So that's a skill event. Leads me back to Chewbacca, okay? We mentioned it a few times. Chewbacca takes bounty hunters. Bounty hunters gear 8 to 10 and some RNG, right? Pray to the RNGesus up there. You can actually unlock Chewbacca. However, as I called out in my last video, think about where you're going. So you got Chewbacca. What are you working on next, okay? This game is always about what you're working on next. So, might want to think about if you're going for Jedi Master Kenobi, right? Eventually, or in your next series of projects, go ahead and take Jango and Cad Bane up a little bit higher and use them for your Chewbacca unlock. If you're going for the Executor, well, go ahead and take up Bosch, go ahead and take up Boba Fett, go ahead and take up Dengar or IG-88. Just a few of them or all of them a little bit higher. Now, the reason I say that is you're going to struggle with any of these events, RNG, right, gear 8 to 10 for the most part. But if you go ahead and commit to my long-term project early on as a player, you're going to be realizing that if I go ahead and put a little bit extra more gear on them, right, if I go ahead and take a couple of them up to gear 12, maybe one to gear 13 in relics, you're going to do not only that event a lot easier and earlier in the game, right, having spent those resources, but you're going to be also progressing to that in-game project that you were working on, that next farm, okay? It's always about the next farm in this game, especially as a free-to-play player. And that's going to bring me to the one that sparked the debate. That's going to be the Ewoks, okay? So if you saw my video, we're talking about C-3PO unlock requirements as Ewoks, okay? And in that video, I said I went ahead and bit the bullet and geared my Ewoks. Now, that again is a niche account. It rushed a GL. It did not have depth like my main account that was from day one playing. So, with the main account, I took the Ewoks, again, no wicket, and I did the skill thing. I wanted the bragging rights, and I did gear 7, gear 8, up to gear 10 on the Ewoks to unlock C-3PO, okay? And that is just a mind-numbing event. You can, at the end of the day, say you are a skilled player. You did it without wicket in gear 8 to 10 Ewoks, right? So in my video, as I said, I just went ahead and bit the bullet. I didn't want to deal with all that. So I geared up my Ewoks a little bit. Now, to that point, I geared them up knowing that that account actually already had a GL, okay? So the need for some lower teams wasn't as big because it had a GL. It already had a few teams, so in terms of like GAC, right, playing that mode, you're still able to very successfully win a GAC when you have a GL and your opponent doesn't, okay? That's just the bottom line. That's how it works. So in addition to that, I knew that if I went ahead and geared them a little bit more at the time, because I wanted to get 3PO without having to struggle, right, I could also slap the Omnicron on. So I did that on that account. I'm not saying it's a great Omnicron, but if you're a lower account, the Ewoks or a little bit of gearing and the Omnicron will help you in GAC as well. So that's why I did that. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying it was the best, most effective way to go, because the Ewoks are not in game, not currently. So they're not needed for nothing further. So again, go ahead. If you want to try and say it's a skill-based matchup, work on it with lower gear. But if you're saying that my project, my next in-game, is whatever metric, then you're going to be wanting to say, let's go ahead and slap some gear on these things and make these things a little bit easier early on, okay? Always be thinking about that in-game project. So that carries me to the Millennium Falcon. If you notice the Millennium Falcon, I don't think anyone's ever really talked about or covered this. The ships to unlock the Millennium Falcon are actually the same ships you need for the Executor. So, if you're going for the Millennium Falcon, in addition to having to have Han and Chewie unlocked, of course, I would submit to you this. The ships and the pilots for those ships, go ahead and throw some gear on them, okay? Go ahead and throw some gear on those bounty hunters that are piloting and crewing the ships for the Millennium Falcon, because all of them are needed for the Executor. So you might as well go ahead and do that. Be working on that early, okay? Because the Executor is still the meta fleet currently in the game, so you're going to want it at some point. Go ahead and throw the gear. Go ahead and throw the relics on those particular pilots for those ships early, okay? It's another one of those that you can say, hey, I got some skill. I beat the Millennium Falcon event with, you know, this gear on my crew lead bounty hunter, pilot bounty hunter. But what did it gain you? Because then you're going to have to go back and farm them up anyway for another project, okay? And then most notably, what we talked about in my last video, what the alternate account is going for right now is Gas, okay? Now, Gas is that one character that I said, once you unlock him, you might as well go for JMK. I still believe that, and I say that because of his requirements, okay? So, if you notice on that account, I'm taking them all up to relics with exception of Ventress, because Ventress doesn't really have an in-game project at this point to be working on. She is viable and great in her Night Sister niche. However, Gear 12 will get you by just as good as Gear 13 in that team. So if you notice, yes, I do have Padme relict. I do have Kenobi relics and Shaak Ti and things like that. And you might be like, why are they relic to that level? Because they're required for other projects, okay? So Shaak Ti and Kenobi, they're required for where I'm going, and that's Grandmaster Kenobi, right? 3PO, need them for JKL, which means JML at some point. So I went ahead and took him to a little bit higher relic as well, because I'm not working on that farm right now, but eventually he's still required tune for something bigger. So you always want to make note of the tunes that you need for bigger in-game projects and be thinking about, yes, it's early. Yes, it's a waste of my resources. But if I go ahead and bite the bullet now, early on, and take this character up to a little bit higher gear or a little bit higher in terms of getting relics on him, what does it save me for later on in-game metrics, okay? So I just wanted to cover that. This game is no longer about skill. I'm not trying to upset anyone or anything like that when I say it. What I mean is, Capital Games will no longer allow this game to be about skill. They've got too many new metrics that require gear gates or relic points that allow you to get into where they want you to go, okay? So just wanted to kind of shoot a quick video on that, talk about that for my newer or lower free-to-play, you know, account holders out there. Whenever you're doing these things, always, first, if you're not having fun, don't do it, okay? It's your account. So make sure to be playing and playing for something. If you're playing for bragging rights and skill, it's not so much a thing anymore. If you're playing for fun, then play for fun, okay? But if you're playing because you love the game and you want to progress and you want to see something eventually be made of your account and your roster and your collection, always be thinking about what I'm working on right now. Even though I could unlock something early, am I going to have to go back and re-gear it anyway? So do I just go ahead and gear it on my first run in the first place? So it's just something to think about. So I wanted to call that out and give you kind of a heads up there. Please, as always, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.